long have you been in this education field working with students who have supports and IEP?
Okay, so I think the question was, how long have we been working in the district with students who need support on IEPs, correct?
In the education field in general.
Okay. So I've been in education. This is my 12th year in District 11. I was in elementary for 9 years, and this is my 3rd year at Mitchell High School. And all 12 of those years, I've worked with students who have had needs or are on IEPs. Only the past 4 years specifically have I been in special education 100%.
And I've been in District 11 for 14 years. I worked for 2 or 3 years as an EA. Most of the time has been at high school, but I worked for 4 years in middle school. All of my years, I've worked with students on IEPs, either as an EA or as a teacher.
I started teaching in 1995, and Ashley, I'm going to be embarrassed if you weren't even born then. Were you born before 1995?
I was born in '84.
All right, so good. I've been since 95. When I started teaching, I was a regular education teacher. I was working with students at a private high school. It was a Catholic high school. We didn't have special education because it was a private school, but they did have a program that served students with disabilities. So, Ms. Grant, from the time I started teaching, I was working with students with some kind of identified disabilities, but I formally got into the field of special education in 2000. So, 2 years ago.
Okay. How long have you been helping students do self-directed?
I know that was kind of hard. I'm going to repeat it.
How long have you been helping students do self-directed IEPs?
Let's go in the same order. Allison, Laura, and then I'll go last.
Okay, so 3 years that I've been at Mitchell, I've been helping students with self-directed IEPs. I didn't do it before at the elementary level. We didn't know about it. But it's something obviously I would do with every student on my caseload. And I'm also a 5-year-old who's starting kindergarten next year, create his own self-directed IEP as well.
For about 2 years at Wasson High School, I helped with self-directed IEPs. And then when I was at middle school, it really wasn't a focus. We did teacher-directed IEPs, which was a real shame. And then for the past 2 years at Mitchell, I've been doing self-directed IEPs. So a total of probably 4 years.
Ms. Grant, I think it's longer than that because if I remember correctly, you and I started together at Wasson. We did it together 5 years at Wasson. So that's when I started in 2008. And then been doing it for the past 6 years at Mitchell. So I'm at 11 years.
That's true, but I was a general education teacher for just a little bit. And then,
oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Why do you have your students do self-directed IEPs?
I think one of the biggest things is that it allows them to have a voice. They can begin to self-advocate for themselves at an early age, and they can learn how to take ownership of their education from the start. They're not sitting in a room where people are talking about them. They're the ones talking about themselves. They can take ownership and really give a voice at why, they're taking these classes and why it's helping them and why their accommodations help. So I think it's just really about giving them a voice to advocate for themselves.
I agree. And kind of just to say the same thing a different way, it increases that self-awareness. And it's the same thing about ownership, but it just increases their ability to know themselves and to know what they need. It's that voice, but really just that self-awareness, knowing their own needs and their own abilities, what they're capable of, and like what their own interests are. The first time you have a conversation with a student about what their strengths and interests are, many times the students just have no idea what they're even interested in or what they're good at. And just even having them think about that can be really hard. So it's really important for students to know those things. It's important for anybody to know those things. And the self-directed IEP is a really great tool to get students to start thinking about that. Because if they're going to be human beings in the world, then they need to know what they're good at and what they're interested in.
I agree with everything that Laura and Allison said. I would say at this point in my experience, the thing that keeps me going with self-directed IEPs is the relationship that it develops between the school and the parents, because it changes the focus of the meeting from being a teacher-led meeting to being a student-led meeting. Then what happens in the structure is that the parent and the teacher are placed on equal footing. And we're placed on equal footing behind and in support of the student. So in my experience, it creates a much better working relationship between the school and the home, and it turns out to be better for the student in the long run as well. A couple of things that Ms. Grant and Ms. Kislich were saying, it develops self-advocacy and self-determination and self-reflection skills in the students. That's true. But man, that takes a long time. You know, it doesn't happen in just one meeting. It doesn't happen in just 1 year. It takes a long time of practicing the practice of self-determined meetings before we kind of see those skills develop in the student. But as far as improving the relationship between the school and the home, that's almost instantaneous. I can't tell you how many IEP meetings I've been to, and especially when it's the very first time that the student has presented their own presentation, and the parents come out of the meeting crying because they're so proud of their students. And the fact that we as a school have the opportunity to create that situation for the parents to experience pride and just joy in what their students can do. Most people are used to that. They're used to going to an IEP meeting and getting beat up and hearing about what their student can't do. And then to change it, and then they come to an IEP meeting and get to see what their student can do. It makes it a much more pleasant experience and a better place to build relationships.
What do you think are the benefits of self-directed IEPs?
I think it's kind of going back to why we do them in the first place, that it just allows the student to show what they're good at. It holds them accountable. It gives them the opportunity to really, just like I said, speak for themselves, explain who they are to their teachers. And it's not about the parents leading it or the teachers leading it and being overstepped and heard. Their voice is the one talking pretty much the entire time of the IEP. It's all about the student. So I think it just builds their confidence. It builds just their personality, their character, just things come out of them that they didn't realize that they could do in the beginning.
What do you?
Sorry. Oh, sorry, real quick. We had a teacher one time who said that it's an opportunity to celebrate the student. And I think that that's true. In a regular IEP meeting, there's not as many of those opportunities to really celebrate the student. And I find that that's true. We've during this quarantine had a lot of these kind of meetings, and they're not as student led just because of the format. And I have found that they're more teacher driven, and the format just doesn't lend itself as much to the celebration. It's when the teacher's the one that's talking and driving the meeting, for whatever reason, it doesn't feel as much of a celebration of the student, and the teachers, I don't think, jump in as much to give their strengths, the students' strengths and what they're good at. I don't know why that is, but it's just a true thing. When the kid is up there and they're presenting, the teachers speak up more and say, oh, here's what you're good at and here's what I noticed about you. It's just a true thing. And so I think when the students lead, that's a benefit, is that the teachers are willing to say good things about the student. When the case managers or the SPED teachers lead, there's more negative things that come up. I don't know why that is, but it's true.
That's an interesting perspective. And just to toss in, so Ashley, the way we have it structured at Mitchell, we have 9 or 10 SPED teachers. I can't remember right now, especially when I don't see them on every day. I forget who all's here. But I'm the SPED coordinator. So my job is to support the teachers in doing what they do. And at this point, especially with the closure, I don't usually attend all IEP meetings, but I have in this situation just to provide technical support or whatever happens to be needed or whatever I can do. And it's been interesting to hear what Ms. Grant just said, because from my perspective, I've done probably 20 IEPs in the last week and a half, whereas each case manager have been doing 2 or 3. And what I found is it really depends on the quality of the technology connection. So like Ms. Grant and I were just in a meeting and we had the PowerPoint set up, but we didn't have a great connection. So it didn't work out. And then like Ms. Grant said, the teacher had to provide more support to compensate for the technology issue. However, I've experienced and witnessed a couple of meetings in the last couple of weeks done through this means where the student was more in charge because they had the technology and because they were in charge. I guess what happens during these kind of meetings is the person who's speaking winds up being the one who owns the meeting. And if the student can't access the technology, then they're left out just like everybody else. But if the student has the technology and is in front, then they ran the entire meeting, and it was and the rest of us kind of sat back. So it was kind of the opposite. Whoever has the floor on these technology meetings owns it, whether it's the teacher or the student. So it's been kind of interesting to see it in this format. And we definitely have, well, first of all, I don't know how we improve the internet connection for all of our students, but that would go a huge way.
What do you think are the benefits? Oh, I already asked that question. What do you think are the challenges with the self-directed IEP?
I think the biggest challenge would just be for parents and teachers to let go, to give over the reins to their student. Like I said, my son is 5. He is in the process of creating his own IEP. And I wish that this was something that I had when I was in the elementary, because every student, no matter their capabilities, is able to create a self-directed IEP, 100%. And I think just for parents and teachers and, other people who are part of the meeting have a hard time letting go during the meeting sometimes. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is just helping teachers really see and understand that the benefits of this outweigh any negative that could ever happen, I guess.
I don't think it is a challenge. I think a perceived challenge is that it takes more time. And so I think a lot of people don't make the time to do it, but when you make the time to sit down with the kid and create their PowerPoint, then it actually saves time. So I think a lot of people think that creating the time to sit with the kid and create their IEP, I think a lot of people think that that's taking more time out of their day and that they don't have the time to do that, that it's an extra step. But in reality, taking the time to do that, taking that extra step is going to save them time, because then they're writing part of the IEP in doing that. So I think it's a perceived challenge, but it's not actually a challenge. Once you figure out how to do it and how to make it part of your routine, then it's really going to save you time in the long run. So it's not really a challenge, but I think it's just kind of a hump that people need to get over and just make it part of your process in writing IEPs. So it's not really a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that people just need to get over and do, because it's just a block that's preventing people from doing it.
I'm going to follow in that suit and then the way that Miss Grant answered it, because, excuse me, there's definitely challenges. Well, okay, so I would say the number one real challenge that I have for self-directed IEPs, and this doesn't happen very often, maybe once a year, maybe less than that. If and especially for a parent that's new to us, that doesn't know how we operate as a school, if they come into our school and they have the historical experience of having to be a strong, powerful advocate for their child, a lot of those parents don't want their student to even attend the IEP meeting because they come into it believing that it's time for a fight with the school and they don't want their child to witness that. So then to suggest to the parent, oh yeah, we would like your student to be at the meeting and to lead that meeting is a huge, is too much of a change for some parents to embrace initially. And I think on the counter side of that, like Ms. Grant was saying, what teachers perceive as a challenge is that the teachers feel, and I think incorrectly, that their job is at stake at an IEP meeting and they have to get everything legally correct or they're going to be sued and they're going to lose their license. And if you turn that over to the student, then you're putting your teacher's license in their hand. And if something gets left out, then you could be in trouble for it. And ironically, I think what happens is, I guess potentially that could happen. But if you pursue self-directed IEPs as a teacher, in my experience, what winds up happening is you develop better relationships with the parents and the families, and you're less likely to find yourself in any kind of legal difficulty. So it kind of it kind of backfires on them. They're trying to protect themselves rather than pursue an opportunity that would make it less likely that they would need to protect themselves.
Are these students your, write that wrong. Okay, so are these students you think can't do self-directed IEPs?
Ashley, could you say that again, please?
These students you think can't do self-directed IEPs?
I believe it says, are there students you think self-directed IEPs?
The answer is no, for me. I think every child can do a self-directed IEP.
I agree. I mean, even in the most profound disability category, you can find a way to make it work, because you can, you know, you can offer picture choices and have the student choose the pictures that they want to put in their self-directed IEP. You can always find a way to make it work to do a self-directed IEP with a student. So I don't think there's any student that can't do a self-directed IEP in some form or fashion.
Exactly. There's no two self-directed IEP meetings that I've ever been to, and I'm talking over almost a decade or over a decade, I guess. If I've probably been to maybe 1,000 self-directed IEPs, and there haven't been any two of them that have been the same or alike. So when you recognize that and you embrace the difference in the diversity in students, then what you're asking is it possible that there's a student who has no desire to be in control or to have some control over their own life? And the answer to that is clearly not, because that's part of what makes us human, right? And if a person has a desire to control an aspect of their life, then they're 100% capable of being in charge of their own meeting.
What are some supports? Okay, yeah, support students need to lead their IEPs.
So what we tend to do at Mitchell is that we meet with our students several times prior to the IEP meeting. And we have the PowerPoint where we go over it with the student. We talk to them about their strengths, their interests, their challenges. We talk about their previous goals and what growth they've made on their goals, what they feel like they've done in order to improve themselves on these goals. We talk about their new goals, how the people or who the people are that are going to support them in these goals. We talk about their course of study, what classes they need, so that they're all on track and understand where they need to go in order to graduate. We talk about their accommodations, their modifications. This isn't necessarily just a one-day thing. It can take several days. And in all honesty, it really starts with the very first day of school and building relationship with your students. These IEP meetings, the building of the self-directed IEPs, go really, really smooth, and they're more like having a conversation with your student than it is trying to build their IEP, because you're finding out things that they love and you're finding out what they want to do for their future. And in all honesty, most of the time, I already know these things because I've already built relationships with my students. And so, like Miss Grant was saying, when sometimes the kids sit down and they're having a hard time trying to figure out what they're good at, you as their case manager and their teacher can say, oh, you're really good. Remember, you're really good at writing. You're really good at, rollerblading. Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So, you're helping remind them of all these wonderful and positive things about themselves. And it's not about what they do wrong. Challenges can be, and they're very open and honest, honestly, I feel like, about their challenges and things that make school hard for them. And they like that their teachers can know from them what their challenges are, not what the teacher thinks their challenges are, but what they believe are their real true challenges. So that's kind of what it looks like.
Well, and the supports will probably look different based on what your kids need. So some kids will need a lot of practice, maybe. And I've had some kids that want to stand up and rehearse their IEP meetings. And I've had other kids that don't really want to do that. I've had some kids want me to sit next to them and kind of read the screen for them, like quietly, so that they can read it out. And I've had other kids not want me to do that. So it really depends on your kids, what their needs are. But it's kind of providing accommodations just like you would in a classroom, depending on what your kids need.
Do you ever get pushback from your students or parents on self-directed IEPs?
Knock on wood, so far I have not. I have not had a student or a parent who doesn't want to do it. They're pretty involved. They like it. They know, even when I have students who don't, then I just tell them that I'll make up their lives and I'll put all this random information about them. And then they're like, no, Miss Kate, never mind. I'll do it. I'm like, perfect. So, when you just have fun with them and you just help them understand this really is about them, then they take ownership in that. So I, knock on wood, have not had any yet.
I have not personally had, I've known kids who have not wanted to do it. None of my kids personally have not wanted to do it, but I've had kids that have been surprised by it because, as you know, in middle school, they haven't had to. And so they're kind of shocked by it, but typically they're really happy about it and they're really proud once they've put it together, and once their parents show up for it. They're usually really proud of themselves and excited to be able to do it. Even the kids who are kind of like, oh no, miss, I don't really want to, and they act scared. Once they have their PowerPoint and they've practiced it and their parents show up, they're usually really proud to do it. And so I haven't had a kid that just doesn't want to, ever. They're even the ones that are like, what? When I tell them that that's what we do, by the time their meeting rolls around, they're usually really excited and proud to do it. Oh, and as far as parents go, I've never had a parent that has pushed back on it at all. Even the parents who are surprised are really open to it and excited. And like Tom was saying earlier, I've witnessed parents in tears, and the flip on the head of having their students lead the meeting is always a really positive experience.
Actually, I have had the experience. I've seen students flat out refuse to do it. And I've seen parents who have flat out refused to permit it. And they're very seldom. I can think of one situation in my entire history, one particular student who's I'm thinking of right now, that absolutely would refuse to do it. Just did not want to, but it's not common. But it has happened. But I would say, in retrospect, so Miss Allison, she's our behavior support person at Mitchell. She works with students that typically have emotional behavioral difficulties, and she is an excellent manipulator. She's very good at getting students to do things that they don't want to do. So I've seen her have to be more creative. She says it's never happened to her, but I can tell you that other teachers would have worked with the same students that she works with, and they would have ran into difficulties. Like part of it is it's her finesse and her talent as a teacher and working with challenging behaviors that she gets me to do things that I don't want to do. So that happens.
Thank you.
Skip question 9 and go to question 10.
Okay. What benefits are there to student-led IEPs?
Not benefits, barriers. What barriers are there to student-led IEPs?
You may have to come back to me. I can't really think of any at the moment, so we'll let Ms. Grant go.
I have a hard time thinking of any either. The only barrier that I can think of is teacher fear, like special education teacher fear, the inability to let go of your own ego and your inability to find the time to do it. That's really the only barrier to making it happen, because you're the one that's in control ultimately, and so your own inability to make it happen is really the only barrier to making it happen.
I think as a special education teacher and as a teacher in general, we spend so much time being overwhelmed and spend so much time being aware of the things that we didn't get done today that I planned to get done. And then when you talk about adding something else, which does take additional time to do something that you don't know about and you're not confident about, you're asking me to do something that's strange and I don't know, then it's not likely that somebody's going to jump on to doing that. When Miss Grant and I started doing this in 2008, it was precisely because our administrative supervisor came to us and said, from now on, your department will do this. We were required to do that. Now, after 2 years, an administrator is not going to be able to tell me not to do it, but it took an administrator to tell me to do it before I started. It wasn't by my own choice, and I'm glad somebody forced it on me.
What are your expectations for students in a self-direct IEP meeting?
So I think that goes back to what Ms. Grant had said, that it kind of depends on every student. You're going to have students who are extremely nervous and just need your support and need you to be the clicker, or they don't want to sit at the head of the table. They want to sit closer. I mean, I think it really is just going to depend on your individual student. And I think that setting expectations with them in the beginning as you're creating the IEP. You know what your students are capable of doing. And I think after they get the first one under their belt, when they come, at any point in time, the first one's always the most scary because they think it's going to be something, I think, different than they expected. And once it's done, that you just see confidence build in them and they're ready for the next year. They're like, oh yeah, I remember doing that. Okay, I know what I'm doing. So I think it's just going to depend on each of your students and just knowing what's going to help them present their IEP best.
Yeah, and we kind of have a template that helps guide them through the high points to click, which Ms. Kislich outlined earlier about their strengths and interests and goals. But really, they can do whatever format they want. We typically do a PowerPoint, but I've heard of people who have students who do just note cards. I know that other people have had students who have done like a poem, which I haven't had any students throw that out there, but I don't have, if a student wants to share an IEP in any way that they want, they can. I've had a student recently who put a video in his because it was something that he really, really loved. So we don't have any expectations except that, you know, they put what they want into their IEP. It's really about what they need.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Grant. I wouldn't say I've ever gotten into a meeting with an expectation for a student per se. The expectation that I enter into is really the expectation on myself that it's my expectation for me to support the student in experience leading their own meeting, because that's really ultimately all I want to happen is them to experience it. And it's not going to be, especially the first time, it's not going to be beautiful or perfect, but it's not supposed to be. We're talking about a process, not an event, right? So you got to give them the opportunity, probably the first time in their lives. You know, I commonly ask that during a meeting, how many meetings have you ever run before? And unless they've done a self-directed IEP meeting before, usually 95% of the time, they say they've never done that, right? So none of us have been great at doing something for the first time. And if we want someone to improve doing this, then we have to give them the place to practice. So I don't go in with expectations on what the student's going to do.
What are your okay. Yeah, what are your expectations for students in a self-directed IEP meeting? I already did that.
Yeah, next question.
What advice do you have for other students, for other teachers, who want to help their students do self-directed IEPs?
I think I would just tell them to give it a chance. It's a process. It's going to take some time to learn the steps and kind of get into the routine of doing it. But once you've done the PowerPoint with the student, the IEP basically, I mean, it's done. Like all you have to do is fill in the bits and pieces because everything's already inside that PowerPoint. And just reminding teachers that and to me, it's not extra work, but in the beginning, it may seem like extra work to them, that this extra work is going to be the most positive and beneficial thing that they can do for their students, to help them grow and just learn to self-advocate for themselves. So.
Yeah, I would say give it some time. Don't do 2 and then go, oh, this isn't working for me. Give it some time. I wouldn't expect anybody to give up after that much, just 2, but try and keep yourself organized and give yourself some grace and give your students some grace and give it some time to work so that you can work out your own system and practice. You should practice and let your kids practice and really try it out and give it some time. Just like Mr. Jacobs said, after 2 years, we would never go back. Whenever I go to a teacher-led meeting, I'm like, why are you doing it this way? Why are you wasting your time and your kids' time doing it this way? So give it some time, get organized, and really give it a fair shot. Because you're really putting some tools in, something powerful in the hands of your kids by allowing them to take control.
I agree with everything that's been said already. I think if I was given advice to a teacher, I wasn't in the situation that I was where I was required to do it, and if I was trying to encourage a teacher to do it on their own initiative, I think what I'd suggest to them is you don't have to jump in all at once, right? Choose a kid or a student that you think is going to be easy. Choose a student that you have a great relationship with. Choose a student who's outgoing, and you know that they're going to just jump at the idea of doing their own meeting, just to give yourself some time to learn the process, right? And develop one, just see how it goes. But I guarantee you, if you just take the time and the chance and the risk of doing one, you're going to quickly see what Miss Kislich and Miss Grant said, how great this is. Miss Grant?
Yeah, I would also say just keep it simple. You don't have to cover every single thing that's in the IEP in the self-directed IEP. So try and keep it simple so that the kid doesn't get caught up in a bunch of jargon because they're not going to know what that means. So also keep it simple so that it's easy for them and easy for you.
The thing that I'm often telling teachers is you don't have to use the IEP language. Let the students choose their words. You don't have to talk about comprehension and fluency and whatever other lingua. The kid can say, I want to learn to read better. That's what it means to the kid. Just let go of the legalistic language and just make it meaningful for the student. Keep it simple.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think I've shared all that I need to.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's really important and really powerful, and I don't wait. I mean, you're a student, but I would hit the ground run and learn what you can as far as teaching goes, but I wouldn't wait. If you can get away with doing it when you start your teaching job, that's how I would start off.
I can tell you this, a large part of my job is going to IEP meeting. And this is the longest job I've ever kept. And a large part of that is because of self-directed meetings. Self-directed, I enjoy going to self-directed IEP meetings. If my job were exactly the same, except for there were no self-directed IEP meetings, it were just student-led meetings, I would not be in this job. I'm telling you, it's that potent, it's that powerful. I enjoy IEP meetings. That's not the case if they were the traditional types. If people embrace this, they're not going to have any regrets.